This lecture has been made available to you courtesy of the American Numismatic Society.
Welcome to the second annual Stack Family Lecture, generously supported by the Stack Family American Numismatics Educational Fund. While this is just the second event at the ANS held under this specific name, this is by no means the second event sponsored by the Stack family. Between 2005 and 2021, Harvey, Larry, and Susan Stack were the sole benefactors of the Coinage of the Americas Conference, otherwise known as COAC. In 2021, the Stack family decided to rebrand their efforts and created the Stack Family Lecture, which is aimed to help support any educational or conference initiatives that are based on a topic or topics related to American numismatics. For their decades of support, the ANS is beyond grateful for the Stack family. Thank you very much. Tonight, we are delighted to have a lecture by ANS Fellow Vicken Yegparian. Vicken is the Vice President of Numismatics at Stack's Bowers Galleries and is a specialist in U.S. copper, silver, and gold coins, including especially Colonial and Confederation era periods. While he may appear young and vigorous, he is no newbie to numismatics and to the ANS in particular, first joining the society in 1996 and then elected as a fellow in 2009. He has given several presentations for the ANS, with perhaps the earliest being way back 20 years ago at the 2004 COAC. This lecture tonight will focus on numismatic objects referencing and commemorating July 4th, 1776, and independence, chiefly those produced between independence and the U.S. Civil War. So without further ado, please help me welcome Vicken Yegparian.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you everyone for coming. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So when Jesse and I were working out some of the details for tonight's lecture, I had suggested that we just scrap the lecture and instead celebrate the 4th of July in December with a barbecue, beers, and some fireworks. But he murmured something about fire wardens and not being too keen on barbecues and fireworks indoors. So I'm sorry to say that you'll have to put up with me for the next 40 minutes or so. So bear with me. But before I dive in, I also want to thank the Stack family for sponsoring tonight's lecture, and Larry Stack in particular for suggesting me for tonight's talk. The Stack family has always been supportive of numismatic scholarship from the obscure to the mainstream, and their sponsorship of this ongoing lecture is just one example. Tonight's topic actually grew out of a piece that Stacks had purchased for inventory back in the early 2000s, a member's badge of the Tammany Society, which you'll see here eventually. I think we got our tech Ben on it. Oh, there we go. So the Tammany Society was the precursor of the Tammany Hall democratic political machine that became a force in New York City as well as national politics from the late 19th to the early 20th centuries. One of the Tammany Society's great obsessions was American independence, and the society celebrated it like clockwork every July 4th. So these are members' badges of the society. One on the left is struck shells, which is somewhere on the other side of that wall. And the other one is a uniface hand engraved piece made of sheet silver. And these are members' badges that would have been made, would have been worn by members. I'm not sure if in New York or elsewhere in the mid-Atlantic or New England. So this is an 1869 painting by artist William Chappell, picturing the Tammany Society's celebration of July 4th, 1812. In the years of research leading up to a 2014 lecture on the badges of the Tammany Society, I kept bumping into their obsession with the 4th of July. So that led me to my next research topic, the numismatics of the 4th of July. So for the last decade or more, I've intermittently researched the subject, compiling a listing of numismatic items referencing the 4th of July or 1776 or independence or the Declaration of Independence itself, whether in words or motifs. Ben? Thank you. Oop, one back. Early on, however, I had limited my reach to items dating before the Centennial celebration in 1876 and to metallic items only, though there are some fascinating paper items too, such as this North Carolina paper money issue from 1778, part of a series of notes featuring mottos in their designs. Here, the motto on the face is simply independence, but there are others in the series also referencing independence, among other things. And of course, perhaps the earliest numismatic manifestation of the Declaration of Independence is on the November 17th, 1776 emission of Massachusetts Sword in Hand notes. On their backs is an American revolutionary brandishing a sword in his right hand, and in his left hand is a scroll labeled Independence. Probably the earliest numismatic manifestation in paper of the Declaration. The plates for the sword in hand issues, as is well known, were engraved by Paul Revere, who modified the plates from the 3 earlier emissions of sword in hand notes to have the armed revolutionary holding the newly issued Declaration instead of the Magna Carta, as seen here on this August 18th issue. So Magna Carta becomes the Declaration. I've confined myself to the period of the first 100 years in order to exclude the proliferation of numismatic items that poured forth in 1876 in honor of the nation's 100th anniversary. And this topic has been covered by Ron Abler's online book, A Cabinet of Centennial Medals, which lists over 400 pieces. So if you're interested in centennial medals or paper numismatics, you may wish to use the exit. I will not be covering those topics in any meaningful way today. Even though my research extends into the 1870s, my most keen interest and focus has been on the earlier issues predating the Civil War. With the growth of coin and metal collecting in the US in the 1850s, there was a parallel growth in the issuance of foreign for-profit series of medals by coin dealers and marketers. I found the most interesting items to be the artistic and organic celebrations of independence that were a reflection of the national mood, not these for-profit coin dealer issues. Imagine that, a coin dealer wanting to make a profit. My listing of pre-1876 items referencing July 4th or independence is approaching 100 items, and undoubtedly there are more waiting for me to discover. Up to this point, I found it easiest to document them in chronological order, but doing so doesn't speak to the reasons why the items exist. So for this presentation, I've attempted to split them into the following thematic semi-chronological categories. And if we can advance to the next slide. The 4 basic categories are items from the 18th century, which are very few, and then items commemorating anniversaries of independence, especially the 25th, 50th, and 75th, and related items, some of which I have in the small display here. And then we have items commemorating a non-independence related event that was held on July 4th. So an organization celebrating their own event, but taking advantage of the July 4th celebration. And then items merely referencing 1776 independence or July 4th. There are many of those. I'm not really going to cover those today because they're quite straightforward. Again, more into the coin dealer issues than the organic celebrations. Perhaps the most famous, most beautiful, and most copied commemorative of American independence is the Libertas Americana medal. I believe this to be the very first medallic numismatic manifestation of the 4th of July. The date in the obverse exurge, signaling the birth of the American Republic, 4th of July, 1776. The whole Libertas Americana medal project was the brainchild of Benjamin Franklin, Minister to France from 1779 to 1785. The American Congress had awarded a medal to only one French officer, Lieutenant Colonel de Fleury, and Franklin was struck by the apparent lack of appreciation for the pivotal role played by France in the Revolution. The Libertas Americana medal was the result, Franklin's personal attempt to right a perceived wrong. Funded mostly by Franklin himself, he engaged the talented French engraver Augustin Dupré to execute the dies. The obverse features a young woman emblematic of liberty. The reverse portrays an allegory of France as Minerva protecting the US, personified as the infant Hercules, protected from the British lion. The dates of the surrender of two British armies, those at Saratoga and Yorktown, are below. The Libertas Americana medals were struck in March and April of 1783, though the idea was conceived as early as 1781. Only two were struck in gold and given by Franklin to the King and Queen of France, while examples in bronze and silver were struck for distribution to French ministers and VIPs on both sides of the Atlantic. Next slide. A second early medal referencing the July 4th, 1776 birth of the Republic is the Diplomatic Medal. It was the brainchild of Thomas Jefferson in this case, who had just completed his stint as Minister to France in 1790 and had just begun his duties as Secretary of State. As was the custom of European countries at the time, France presented him with a gift upon his retirement as minister, which Jefferson accepted after some deliberation and against the constitutional prohibition against such gifts. Timely. Shortly after entering his role as Secretary of State, Jefferson began the process of creating a similar diplomatic gift to honor retiring European ministers. The gifts were often quite generous, such as the large gold medal and chain received by John Adams from the Dutch for his service as minister. This was a long-standing tradition of the Dutch, with the weight of the chain varying according to the importance of the country and the length of the minister's service. Jefferson engaged the Paris Mint, which had struck all of the US's medals up to that point, with Augustin Dupré tasked with the execution of the dies according to Jefferson's designs. Though the project was commenced in mid-1790, the struck medals were delayed and not ready for delivery until early 1792. The enormous dies for this nearly 2 3/4-inch medal failed multiple times. As a result, Dupré created 2 different obverses and 3 different reverse dies. In the end, 4 medals in gold are thought to have been struck, each intended to contain about $150 in value, which translates to over 4 troy ounces of gold. Unfortunately, none of the original awarded gold medals or chains seem to survive. As a diplomatic gift, its designs needed to convey the symbolism of the gifting country. So on the obverse, a masterful rendition of the Great Seal was employed, with the US clearly defined. On the reverse is, as numismatic researcher and author John Adams describes, a seated queen representing America receives in her left hand a cornucopia from Mercury standing on the right, representing commerce. Behind the queen are various symbols of trade, including bales, a barrel, and an anchor. Behind Mercury is an ocean on which is the bow of a ship with land behind both. The legend reads, "To peace and commerce," and in the exurge, 4 July 1776. Though complex and allegorical, the well-executed designs speak to the purpose of the medal, to encourage peace and commerce through diplomatic efforts, a great necessity for a new nation that was just 15 years old. When the diplomatic medal first came to the attention of numismatics in 1837, it was not properly understood as the diplomatic gift that it was. Instead, the July 4th, 1776 date was taken literally, and the medal was attributed to the Revolution. As medals, splashers, dies, and original correspondence came to light in the 19th century, its proper place in American diplomatic history came to be understood. Today, just 4 original bronze strikings are extant, in addition to nearly 20 lead splashers of the various diplomatic medal dies. A fascinating related medal is a cast or electrotype medal featuring the John Adams President of the U.S. obverse die by Allen Leonard, muled with the reverse of the diplomatic medal. Of the Dupré sign version that was never adopted. So if you see on the actual issued medal, there's no signature of Dupré there. but this one does have the tiny little signature there, and that would have been copied from one of the splashes that was known in the mid-19th century. The Adams obverse die is of competent work, but a far cry from the Dupre reverse. So the mating of these two designs is quite jarring. The Adams obverse by Leonard was the design that he put forth as part of the application for the post of chief engraver of the U.S. Mint, which was open due to the death of Christian Gobrecht in July 1844. Whether any original medals were struck from the Leonard die is unknown, as I have seen only somewhat crude casts like the one on screen. It stretches the imagination that Leonard would have put forth crude casts of his design. At the end of the day, between the mediocre quality of his work and Leonard not wanting to play politics, he lost his bid for the post, with James Barton Longacre prevailing. There are three additional 18th century manifestations of July 4th independence and 1776 in numismatics. The most obvious are the 1776 dated continental currency dollars, long thought to be a coinage of the Continental Congress. Recent research has shown them to be medals struck in Europe in the 1780s. So the 1776 date should be considered commemorative of independence and the birth of the nation. Another 1780s manifestation of independence is the prodigious series of coppers struck by the authority of the state of Connecticut, dated 1785 through 1788. All of the emissions have on their reverse the legislatively mandated emblem of liberty with an olive branch in her hand, with the abbreviated Latin inscription, Indi et Lib, standing for independence and liberty. Just a few years removed from the hard-fought War of Independence, and less than a decade removed from the actual Declaration of Independence, the patriotism fostered by the war was now manifest in the coinage of Connecticut. One of my favorite examples of July 4th in numismatic is the 1790 Standish Barry threepence. These diminutive silver coins, struck by Baltimore silversmith Standish Barry, bear not only his name, city, and denomination, but also the very specific date, July 4, 1790, at the lower obverse rather. The obverse portrait was long thought to represent George Washington or perhaps Barry himself, but more recent research by Max Spiegel has pegged it as Baltimore Mayor James Calhoun. The tempting and obvious reason for the July 4 date is that it was celebrating Independence Day in 1790. This would not be too far off base, given that Barry was a patriot who had joined a local militia in 1777 when he was just 14. Spiegel also made the case that the rather specific July 4th, 1790 date was used to indicate that the coin was struck to the standards suggested in Thomas Jefferson's proposal entitled, and it's a long one, Plan for Establishing Uniformity in the Coinage, Weights, and Measures of the United States, published on, you guessed it, July 4th, 1790. A contemporary citizen of Baltimore might have recognized the portrait of Calhoun, although crude, but would he have recognized the reference to an arcane if recent coinage proposal? I'm guessing not. Ben, next slide. Thank you. Perhaps my favorite category of the 4th of July numismatics are the celebrations of the anniversaries of independence. After all, who doesn't love a birthday, especially when you're so young? And I would venture to say that anything under 100 is quite young for a country. Though we have three major anniversaries that our country celebrated, 25, 50, and 75, before its first 100 years, there are comparatively few medals created for these milestone events. For the year 1801, we count just one, the Thomas Jefferson Inaugural Medal, or 25th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence Medal. We were evidently too busy building the Republic to take out some time to create more than just this one numismatic celebration of a milestone. It is perhaps unsurprising that Jefferson, a noted medal collector and fan of the genre, would happily support the first ever medal specifically dedicated to commemorating the Declaration adopted on July 4th. It was the idea of Henry Voigt, then working as the Mint's chief coiner. Voigt wrote to President Jefferson in December 1801 that, quote, "The citizens of Philadelphia, Friends to our government and your administration have often expressed a desire of seeing a medallion struck to commemorate the Declaration of Independence and the past triumph of republicanism on the 4th March, 1801. The latter date, of course, was the day of Jefferson's inauguration, the end of the so-called Revolution of 1800, by which power gracefully passed between opponents for the first time in human history. Voigt's motivation, aside from flattering the president to whom he was quite dedicated, was to find employment for a German artist of superior talents. Voigt had personally taken over the indenture of John Reich and was thus charged with his care. A valuable medal commission would be the ideal way to launch his career. Voigt took the liberty of allowing Reich to create the medal and strike it at the Philadelphia Mint without asking for Jefferson's permission. Reich had already created a medallic portrait of Jefferson as the ailing Robert Scott subcontracted work on Jefferson's large Indian peace medal to the young German. The reverse of the medal depicted, according to Voigt, the goddess Minerva to represent liberty as well as wisdom. She holds the Declaration of Independence and lays it on a rock, representing the Constitution. So in tiny letters is Declaration of Independence on the rock of the Constitution. It was the first time the Declaration had been graphically illustrated on a coin or medal. The exurgal legend made the intent plain to commemorate July 4, 1776. Jefferson took to the idea. He wrote to Voigt the day after he received the letter, saying, quote, "The Declaration of Independence is certainly an epic of ours, being so remarkable as to merit a medal." Jefferson requested more medals, in addition to the one he was sent as a gift. He sent specimens to both his daughters, as well as his daughter Maria's mother-in-law, among other friends. The medal is rare today, with fewer than 24 extant in silver and white metal, with silver examples far outnumbering those in white metal. Most went into non-numismatic hands, Jefferson's family, friends, and other dignitaries, and show signs of love and handling as a result. The 1801 Jefferson medal shows a great degree of skill in engraving and high production quality, and the surviving paper trail outlines why, how, and where it was made. 25 years later, in 1826, the numismatic celebrations of the Semicentennial of American Independence are chiefly the products of private mints, and no facts surrounding their production survive. The only evidence is the medals themselves. The first of these medallic celebrations of the Semicentennial I will cover is the best known, having been listed as a so-called dollar by Hibbler and Kappan in their pioneering 1963 work. It is known in silver, as seen here, as joined brass shells, and in white metal. It is listed in copper as well, though I have not yet encountered one. This may or may not be an erroneous listing. Perhaps a high-quality copper cast or electrotype was casually taken as genuine sometime in the past. The 1826 date, 13 stars, and National Jubilee legends leave little doubt that this is commemorative of the nation's 50th. The reverse reads, Declaration of Independence signed July 4th, 1776, with the closing line of the Declaration at its center. For the support of this, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Interestingly enough, the reverse repeats the common misconception that the Declaration was signed on July 4th. It was rather adopted by, not signed by, the Continental Congress on that day. These medals were without doubt made for a very specific celebration of the National Jubilee. All silver and white metal specimens I have seen in person or in images have been very consistently and carefully holed around the 12 o'clock area of the obverse. So they were meant to be worn, perhaps at the event itself. One would like to think that they were the official medals of the Jubilee celebration in Washington, D.C., which was organized by a Committee of 13 under the chairmanship of Mayor Roger Whiteman. I know of 5 in silver, and at least 2 of them have their edges inscribed. One reads, presented by W. McFarland on the edge, while the other is inscribed B.A. Meredith, July 4th, 1826. Ben, can you advance the slide? Even with the power of the internet, I've so far been unable to find these individuals at all, or in connection with any celebration of the National Jubilee. The Meredith medal also appears to be struck over some undetermined host coin or metal. I love this edge because it actually just references July 4th, 1826. So whether it was made on that day or worn on that day, I'm not sure, but I'd like to think so. A single example composed of joined brass struck shells is known. Next slide. As is a single obverse, as well as a single obverse brass shell that has been mistakenly referred to as a brockage in the past. These were perhaps originally made for use as decorative objects, such as for a piece of furniture or in a snuff box lid. And next slide. Here's a particularly beautiful white metal specimen in the collection of the ANS, and it's here in the display in front. The obverse die is signed CR in tiny letters, but no positive attribution to this engraver has been made. Michael Hodder, in his cataloging of the Ford collection specimens, put forth Charles Rawlinson as a possibility. Charles was the son of banknote engraver William Rawlinson, with whom he had worked until before his premature death in 1833 at the age of 40. And next slide. This next medal lacks the 1826 date, but based on its style and legends, I believe it to be a product of the mid-1820s, and most probably an 1826 medal celebrating the National Jubilee. Its obverse is simple enough. The federal eagle, 13 stars, and the motto, E pluribus unum. The reverse is also quite simple. The legends reading Union, Independence, July 4, 1776. This medal is extremely rare and is quite simply a forgotten relic of the Semicentennial of Independence. There is an apparently unique striking in silver in the ANS collection, its whole again suggesting it was meant to be worn, as with the 1826 National Jubilee medal. An example, and that medal is also here in the case. An example described as tin appears in Woodward's May 1864 auction of the McCoy collection, reappearing in Cogan's January 1876 sale of the Jewett collection. I have not been able to trace this example's present whereabouts. And a well-worn trial strike in copper on an undersized, unidentified host also exists, pictured here. The letters and numerals in July 4, 1776 are distinctive and appear to be a match to those on the 1826 National Jubilee medal. So it is perhaps from the same hand or the same shop as the National Jubilee medal, or at the very least, the die sinkers shared a common source for their letter punches. So if you see here, I mean, it's very distinctive, this wacky looking 4, same shape, and even the very distinctive 6s. So again, I think just some overlay work needs to be done, but doesn't prove anything other than that the punches are potentially the same. A third medal, which is most probably another celebration of the nation's semicentennial, is also undated. Again, in style and fabric, it is a product of the 1820s. Like the last, it is rather simple and straightforward, the obverse bearing an eagle as on the Great Seal, the legend reading liberty and equality, sentiments echoed in the Declaration. The document itself is referenced in a simple reverse legend, which includes the inaccurate signed July 4th, 1776 legend. Notwithstanding the uncirculated specimen you see on the screen, I believe this medal was also meant to be worn at some event honoring the semicentennial of our nation's independence. Next slide. All three of the other specimens I've traced are whole, including this positively awful specimen that clearly spent a lifetime underground. So like the others, this semicentennial medal was probably produced to be worn at some specific celebration. Celebrating 1826 was as much about celebrating the nation's birth as it was about honoring the revolutionary generation, which had mostly passed from the scene by that point. It was also about honoring the history that had been neglected in the march towards growth and expansion. As is well known, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, both signers of the Declaration, died within hours of each other on July 4, 1826, an incredible coincidence. Though on opposite sides of the political spectrum when they were in their primes, they were lifelong friends and pen pals, writing each other into old age. And as illustrated on the circa 1860 Declaration of Independence medalette, with dies created by Alfred S. Robinson, Jefferson was its honored author and Adams the pillar of its support, the "it" being the Declaration of Independence. Next slide. The near simultaneous deaths of Adams and Jefferson left Charles Carroll as the last surviving signer in 1826. A medal from dies by Christian Gobrecht was struck at the U.S. Mint in honor of Carroll entering his 90th year. A strange way to commemorate one's old age. The date recorded on the medal is September 20th, 1826, which is one day after his 89th birthday. What is most interesting to me is that Carroll is touted on the medal as my emphasis of mine, surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence after the 50th anniversary. I should also point out that the pen and scroll at lower reverse is assumed to represent the Declaration and the pen with which Carroll signed it. This would be the second ever graphic representation of the Declaration on a coin or medal. Here might be a good point to interject what is popularly called the American Eagle Medal, but is perhaps more properly called the Death of General Lafayette Medal. Dated 1834, it portrays a military bust of Washington with a list of the first 7 presidents on its obverse, all around here, ending with Lafayette appointed Major General of the U.S. Army, 1777, died May 20th, 1834. Washington author Neil Musante posits that the engraver, John H. Henning, learned of Lafayette's passing in the midst of preparing this medal, and added this line as a result. Important to our study here is the reverse, which references independence and portrays an eagle clutching a scroll inscribed, "All men are created equal," and dated on the face of the scroll, July 4th, 1776. Here is the third ever graphic portrayal of the Declaration of Independence on a coin or medal. Before we move on to the 75th anniversary of independence, we must make a little detour back in time. I quote the words of Andrew Burstein, author of a book on the 1826 Jubilee. The great event staged, quote, "The great event staged in anticipation of the National Jubilee was in fact spread out over 2 years, 1824 and 5, and touched all 24 of the United States. This was the heartening return of the Marquis de Lafayette, a celebrity on 2 continents whose name was associated with the language of liberty and rights and the Republican spirit in both the American and French revolutions. He was the last of a dying breed, having fought with the Continental Army, having led American forces at the rank of general, and all America knew that he had been like a son to George Washington. Lafayette was an integral part of the national creation story. So it is no wonder that Lafayette and his adopted father were portrayed on small medalettes struck at the time of Lafayette's visit. The most numerous is the one attributed to Charles Cushing Wright, seen on the screen here, featuring a bust of Lafayette on one side, dated 1824, and a bust of Washington on the other. I know it looks like 1821 in that previous slide, but that's just the way it was struck. Just the die expanded and kind of absorbed some of the metal of the 4. There's a series of interrelated, extremely rare silver medalettes of Washington, Lafayette, and Franklin that must also have been made for or around the time of Lafayette's visit in 1824, but they have been largely overlooked. Their extreme rarity and diminutive size, most are in the range of 8 to 9 millimeters, smaller than the Advil in your medicine cabinets. So that makes them very easy to overlook. There's one that appears to be an exact imitation, the one on the screen here, of the C.C. Wright type, which we saw on the previous slide. but of cruder style and of a much smaller module, just that 8 to 9 millimeter size versus the 14 millimeter Wright version. I know of only a single piece, that in the Massachusetts Historical Society collection. Next. The Washington die of the previous medalette also comes paired with two other reverses, one featuring only 1776 in the center of a wreath of laurel and oak, of which I've only traced two. The next has the reverse. The next has 1776 at its center and Friend of Liberty around. Of these, I know of just one, pictured here and in the case down below. The next has the Friend of Liberty reverse also comes paired with a different Lafayette obverse than the medal that we saw earlier, and I'll put them all on one screen in a moment. One with a seemingly identical head, but without the 1824 date and with different placement of the legends. Next slide. There also exists a pairing of a crude Franklin bust with the 1776 in wreath reverse, of which I know of just one, again in the Massachusetts Historical Society. To make matters even more interesting, there's a larger module silver medal measuring about 14 millimeters, featuring heads of Washington and Lafayette that are visually identical to the heads on the smaller 8 to 9 millimeter medals mentioned a moment ago. It would not surprise me if an overlay determined them to be actually identical. These heads are appended to upper bodies clad in military uniforms, with the Revolutionary War heroes now identified as general in the inscriptions, rather than just by their full names. The Washington side is dated 1776, while Lafayette's is triple dated, 1776 for independence or the birth of our nation, 1789 for the French Revolution, and 1824 for the year of Lafayette's return visit to the US. Next slide. The sheer number of different combinations of the same or similar dies is baffling, especially since so few of these medalettes survive. And the overwhelming similarity of the heads on the small and large issues of the Washington and Lafayette dies leads one to wonder if a matrix punch for the heads was utilized to create the dies. So I know the scale is off, but this head is essentially identical to that, and this to that. And I guess only an overlay will determine if they're actually the same. This would explain the exactitude of the heads between the two issues. Or maybe these are reworkings of the same physical die going from a larger to a smaller or a smaller to a larger die face. Perhaps the design details and legends were then added, moved, or removed from the die if needed. To try to figure this out, again, I think an overlay is going to be necessary. One also naturally wonders what the purpose of these tiny medals was. Were they meant to be sold as medalettes? Who would buy something so awkwardly small? While studying one of them, I dropped it like 2 or 3 times. So it's just very, very, very weird. Use as jewelry seemed likely, though I have only seen one with an actual mount, an example of the Lafayette Friend of Liberty type. And that's also in the case. A gap in the rim of the large module type here and here hints at a space in the die to accommodate an integral loop. So again, probably meant to be worn. Though there are undoubtedly a few more out there, I've counted only 10 total examples among the 6 combinations of 8 different dies in this small series. Were very few made because they were just totally unpopular, or were large numbers made, but their minuscule size made them prone to loss, never to be seen again. The 1824 dated medalettes with a head on both sides are clearly commemorative of Lafayette's triumphant return to the United States. But are the medalettes with just the head of Washington, Lafayette, or Franklin on one side and a 1776 date on the other, perhaps made for the 1826 Semicentennial rather than for Lafayette's visit? We may never know for sure, but it's worth considering. I should also point out that additional mulings may have been made. 2 different reverses are paired with the Washington obverse, so here and here. So why not also with the Lafayette and Franklin reverses? Lafayette and Franklin medalettes, I'm sorry. So I know all the photos were enlarged, so the relative scale is impossible to compute, but this is the differential in size. That's 8.5 millimeters versus 91 millimeters, which is the next metal that we'll be discussing. So this is Charles Cushing Wright's magnum opus, his George Washington Declaration of Independence medal at 91 millimeters, or over 3.5 inches. It's positively gargantuan in comparison to the one on the right, which we were discussing a moment ago. So this is essentially 10% of the larger medal. It is also the only numismatic celebration of the 75th anniversary that I have been able to positively identify. Neil Musante, researcher of all things Charles Cushing Wright, has found that Wright started work on this medal in 1851, but with no commission to pay for it. Musante opined that Wright was driven by patriotism to create this medal, it being the 75th anniversary of independence. Beyond patriotism, Musante feels, was a deeper and more personal motive, to leave behind a lasting masterpiece of medallic art, so he would be remembered as an artist, not just as a skilled engraver. In the words of Musante, quote, Wright wanted to produce something exceptional, something uniquely American, and something deeply personal. That work became, of course, the Declaration of Independence medal. It was his masterpiece. He was there at the beginning when Trumbull began the painting. He was friends with Asher Durand, who created the engraving that would introduce Trumbull's painting to the rest of America. For him, to bring that scene to a medal that would endure forever was the greatest of challenges and perhaps the greatest bit of die engraving ever attempted in this country. Wright also held the lifelong ambition to create the finest medallic portrait of Washington ever made. While Duvivier's portrait on the Washington before Boston medal may still hold that distinction, Wright's very nearly displaces it, end quote. The medal, of course, as Neil comments, is based upon John Trumbull's famous 1819 painting, The Declaration of Independence, which was commissioned by Congress and now hangs in the Capitol Rotunda, which is this. Wright's friend, Asher B. Durand, received the commission to create the engraving which made Trumbull's massive work famous. Although popularly known as the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it actually portrays the Congressional Committee's June 28, 1776 presentation of the independence document to Congress. Wright also created a quote, historical tablet die that outlines a series of historical events beginning with the discovery of America by the English, July 3rd, 1497, here in the top line, hard to read there, and ends with the assault on Quebec by Americans on December 31st, 1775, after which you would turn the medal over to continue the chronology and witness Wright's rendition of the Declaration of Trumbull's Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. Wright's masterpiece spawned a flurry of decorative objects and medals that used his work as their basis. Very few of Wright's medals were struck, perhaps as few as 10 or 15, including those made in the Declaration die with the historical tablet die. So the decorative objects filled a void in the marketplace produced by the rarity of the struck medals. But sounds like Jesse told me this evening that the actual dies for the Charles Cushing Wright medal are again on the other side of that wall someplace. So maybe we can strike some more. Wright's masterpiece spawned a flurry of decorative objects and medals that used his work as their basis. Very few of Wright's medals, so getting back to the decorative objects, the Declaration of Independence die was also co-opted in 1859 by New York electrotyper Samuel H. Black, who fused an electrotype shell of the medal into an electrotype plaque. So this is actually two pieces, the copy of Charles Cushing Wright's declaration into the overall plaque, which portrays the full text of the Declaration, as well as facsimile signatures of those patriots who put their names to the document. Having appropriated the dead C.C. Wright's exact design, Black, of course, removed Wright's prominently placed name from the medallion. Another larger version of the plaque features an ornate decorative border. So this is basically the same as this with that border attached. An even larger and more elaborate decorative electrotype plaque called the National Medallion. Sorry, it's a little dark here, but it's a little three-dimensional. It's almost like a tray, but it says the National Medallion in and in the upper border there. It features Wright's Declaration die at the left here, paired with the medallion of the Declaration of the signers of the Declaration at the right, with the Washington before Boston medal in between. So the two most triumphal portraits of Washington in the medallic art up to that point. The text of the Declaration is above, and a battle roll of the Revolution and a list of presidents is below. Rounding out the medals that co-opt Wright's design is an electrotype medal with the Declaration on one side and the signers on the other, as seen in Black's National Medallion plaque in the previous slide. It was perhaps made by or at the behest of a Gustav Segewagen, a seller of medallions in New York City in the mid to late 19th century. I know I promised not to delve into the volume of medals produced for the Centennial in 1876, but I will come asymptotically close. One of my favorite July 4th medals is a small one featuring the American flag on the obverse and a celebration of July 4th, 1874 on the reverse, the odd 98th anniversary of American independence. Clearly by the same hand is this gem of a cross-shaped medal. Next slide. Featuring a Liberty Bell and 1776 on one side, and the reverse text reads, July 5, 1875, begin our 100th year on the other. The author of this piece clearly couldn't wait to begin sales of his prolific series of Centennial medals, of which there are many dozens, maybe 100. A relatively large group of medals that I've discovered during my research celebrate events that took place during the July 4th celebrations. It appears that a number of organizations took advantage of this national holiday to kill two birds with one stone. The only US coin I've encountered with a clear connection to July 4th is the 1829 half dime of the LM2 die combination. Due to demand for the small silver coin, the production of half dimes resumed in 1829 after a 24-year hiatus. One piece revealed in the collection of Director of the U.S. Mint, Robert M. Patterson, is a very deeply toned, very sharply struck 1829 half dime of the LM2 die combination. It was wrapped in a handwritten letter from Adam Eckfeldt, chief coiner of the U.S. Mint at the time. The letter attests that the half dime is, quote, one of the few of a new emission by him struck on the 4th day of July, AD 1829. An example also went into the enormous foundation stone of the new U.S. Mint laid later that day. Though deep toning shrouds what are most probably the reflective surfaces of a proof on the Eckfeldt-Patterson specimen, several unequivocal proofs of this die combination do survive, including the one pictured here, which is from the D. Brent Pogue collection. The Boston Sabbath School produced this medal to celebrate its Jubilee year on July 4th, 1842. Its legends weaving religious themes with the celebration of independence and July 4, 1776. I believe the dies are by Robert Lovett Jr., and they were later muled with several other dies to create rarities for collectors. On July 4th, 1848, the cornerstone for the National Monument was laid in Washington, D.C. Designed by architect Robert Mills, it is now better known as the Washington Monument, which looks a little bit different than it is on the medal because the design changed over time. It wasn't completed until the 1880s. These medals were produced for and distributed at the cornerstone laying ceremony, hence the date, July 4, 1848, in the reverse exurge, which maybe is a little indistinct. Continuing the theme of 1848, I would like to close with this white metal medal of the French Revolution of 1848 that eluded me for a decade. With the trifecta of serendipity, Scott Miller, and the Newman Numismatic Portal, I had found 5 19th century auction appearances of this medal. Several of these are probably appearances of the same specimen, but I could not locate an actual specimen of the medal or even a photo of one. With some help and direction from Scott, I determined that an example was in the Appleton collection at the Massachusetts Historical Society. This is perhaps the first time that an image of this medal is being shown. The last time it was listed in any standard reference was in Charles Ira Bushnell's Treatise on Tokens, published in the founding year of the ANS, just 10 years after the medal must have been produced. Its obverse references July 4th, 1776, may be a little difficult to see in the toning, as well as February 23rd, 1848, a date in the so-called February Revolution or Revolution of 1848 in France. The flags and shields of France and the US, as well as the articles of war, quite literally fill the obverse, as well as a liberty cap at the top. The reverse is rather simple and uncrowded by comparison. République Française, around clasped hands in glory, while the English translation of the French national motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, is towards the outer border. The existence of the medal is not surprising. The revolutionaries in Europe in 1848 often looked to the Declaration of Independence for inspiration and to the American people for help and guidance. When I first ran into 19th century auction catalog descriptions of this medal, I thought it was one of the cheap tin medals prolifically produced around the 1848 revolution. But its English language rendering of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and the American style of the dates points to American manufacture. But by and for whom? These are some of the many small mysteries I've encountered during the hours of researching and collecting the numismatics of the 4th of July. I hope you have enjoyed this quick journey back to 1776. There's so much more I had hoped to include here, but in the interest of time, could not. One day, I hope to publish a more complete and fully contextualized reference on this thematic grouping of metals, tokens, and coins. Perhaps the coming US Semicentennial or 250th anniversary in 2026 will provide the necessary inspiration. Thank you to everyone in the room and out there in the ether for watching and spending a little part of your night with me.